Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Part 5. My Sea Adventure. Chapter 22. How I Began My Sea Adventure. There was no return of the mutineers, not so much as another shot out of the woods. They had got their rations for that day, as the captain put it, and we had the place to ourselves in a quiet time to overhaul the wounded and get dinner. Squire and I cooked outside in spite of danger. Even outside we could hardly tell what we were at, of the horror of the loud groans that reached us from the doctor's patients. Out of the 8 men who had fallen in action, only 3 still breathed. That one of the pirates who had been shot at the loophole, Hunter and Captain Smollett, and of these the first 2 were as good as dead. And the mutineer, indeed, died under the doctor's knife, and Hunter, do what we could, never recovered consciousness in this world. He lingered all day, breathing loudly like the old buccaneer at home in his apoplectic fit, but bones of his chest had been crushed by the blow and his skull fractured in falling. And some time the following night, without a sign or sound, he went to his Maker. As for the captain, his wounds were grievous indeed, but not dangerous. No organ was fatally injured, and Anderson's ball, for it was the job that shot him, had broken his shoulder blade and touched the lung. Not badly. The second only had torn and displaced some muscles in the calf. He was sure to recover, the doctor said, but in the meantime and for weeks to come he must not walk or move his arm, nor so much as speak when he could help it. My own accidental cut across the knuckles was a flea bite. Dr. Livesey patched it up with plaster and pulled my ears for me into the bargain. After dinner, the squire and the doctor sat by the captain's side a while in consultation, and when they had talked to their heart's content, in the little past noon, the doctor up his hat and pistol, girt on a cutlass, put the charge in his pocket, and with a musket over his shoulder, crossed the palisade onto the north side and set off briskly through the trees. Gray and I were sitting together at the far end of the block, out to be earshot of the officers consulting, and Gray took his pipe out of his mouth and fairly forgot to put it back again, so thunderstruck that he was at this occurrence. "Why in the name of Davy Jones," said he, "is Dr. Livesey mad?" "Why, no," said I. "He's about the last of his crew for that, I'll take it." "Well, shipmate, mad he may not be, but if he's not, you mark my words, I am. I take it. The doctor has his idea, but if I'm right, I am now going to see Bengen. He appeared, I was right, and he appeared later, but in the meantime, the house was being stiffly hot, and the patch of sand inside the palisade ablaze with the midday sun, and I began to get another thought into my head, which was not by many means so right. What I began to do to envy the doctor was walking in the cool shadows of the woods, with the birds about him and the pleasant smell of pines, while I sat grilling, with my clothes stuck to the hot resin, and so much blood about me, and so many poor dead bodies lying all around, that I took a disgust of the place that was almost as strong as fear. All the time I was washing out the blockhouse and then washing up the things from dinner. This disgust, envy kept in me, growing stronger and stronger, till at last, being near a bread bag, no one observing than me, that I took the first step towards my escapade, and filled both pockets of my coat with biscuits. I was a fool, if you like, and I certainly was going to do a foolish, overbold act, but I was determined to do it with all the precautions in my power. These biscuits, should do anything befall me, would keep me, at least, from starving till far on the next day. The next thing I lay hold was a brace of pistols, and as I already had the powder horn and bullets, I felt myself well supplied with arms. As for the scheme I had in my head, it was not a bad one itself. It was to go down the sandy spit that divides the anchorage on the east of the open sea, find a white rock I had observed last evening, ascertain whether it was them or not that Ben Gunn had hidden his boat, the thing was quite worth doing, and I still believe, as I still believe, but, but I was certain that I should not be allowed to leave the enclosure. My only plan was to take the French leave and slip out when nobody was watching, and that was so bad in a way of doing it that it made the thing itself wrong. But I was only a boy, and I'd made my mind up. Well, as things at last fell out, I found an admirable opportunity. The squire and Gray were busy helping the captain with his bandages, and the coast was clear. I made a bolt for it over the stockade into the thickest of trees, and before my absence I observed I was out of cry from my companions. This was my second folly, far worse than my first. I have left two sound men to guard the house, but I liked the first, which was a help to saving us all. I took my way straight for the east coast of the island, for I was determined to go down the seaside in spite to avoid all chance of observation of the anchorage. It was already late afternoon, although still warm and sunny. As I continued to thread the tall wood, I could hear far below me not only the continuous thunder of the surf, but a certain tossing of foliage and grinding of bow. This which showed me the breeze had been set higher than usual. Soon cool draughts of air began to reach me. In a few steps farther I came forth into the open borders of the grove, and saw the sea lying blue and sunny in the horizon. The surf was tumbling and tossing its foam on the beach. I'd never seen the sea quiet around Treasure Island. The sun might blaze overhead, the air might be without a breath, the surface smooth and blue, but these great rollers would be running along all the external coast, thundering and thundering day and night, and I scarce believe that there is one spot in the island where a man could be out of the earshot of the noise. I walked along beside the surf with great enjoyment till, thinking I was now gone far enough south, I took a cover of some thick bushes and crept really up to the right of the spit. Behind me was the sea from the anchorage, the sea breeze, as though it had been blown itself by its unusual violence, already at an end. If I had been succeeded by light, veritable airs from the south and southeast, carrying great banks of fog. In the anchorage under the lee of Skeleton Island, I lay still and leaden as when we first entered it. The Hispaniola, in the unbroken mirror, was exactly portrayed from the truck to the waterline, the Jolly Roger hanging from her peak. Alongside lay one of the gig's silver and stern sheets. He could him I could always recognize. While a couple of men were leaning over the stilk backwards, one of them with a red cap, and the very rogue, and I'd seen for some hours before a stride leg on the palisade. Apparently they were talking and laughing, though at the distance, upwards of a mile, I could hear no word of what was said. After all, at once, there had been the most horrid and unearthly screaming, which startled me badly, although I remember the voice of Captain Flint, and though even even thought that I could make out the bird by her bright plumage as she sat perched on her master's wrist. Soon after the jolly boat shoved off and pulled for shore, the man with the red cap and his comrade went below by the cabin's companion. Just about the same time the sun had gone rapidly down the spyglass. As the fog was collecting rapidly, it began to grow dark in earnest, and I saw I must lose no time if I were to find the boat that evening. The white rock, visible enough above the brush, was still some eighth of a mile farther down in sight, and it took me a goodish while to get up with it, crawling often on all fours among the scrub. And night had almost come when I laid my hands on its rough sides. Right below there was an exceedingly small hollow of green turf, hidden by banks and thick underwood about a knee deep, and there grew very plentifully, in the centre of the dell, sure enough, a little tent of goatskins, in what like gipsies carry around them in England. I dropped into the hollow, lifted the side of the tent, and there was Bengen's boat, homemade if anything was homemade, a rude, lopsided framework of tough wood, and stretched upon the covering of goatskins. even with the hair inside. The thing was extremely small, even for me. I can hardly imagine that it could fold it with a full-sized man. There was one thwart set as low as possible, and a kind of stretcher in the boat's bows. I had a double paddle for propulsion. I had not seen the coracle such as ancient Britons made, but seen one since, to give you a rather no fairer idea of Ben Gunn's boat than saying that it was the first and the worst coracle ever made by man. But the exceedingly great advantage of the coracle it certainly possessed, for it was exceedingly light and portable. Well, now that I may have found the boat, you would have thought I had enough for our country for once. But in the meantime I had taken another notion, and become so obstinately fond of it that I would have carried it out, and believed in the teeth of Captain Smollett himself, and I was about to slip under the cover of the night, cut the Hispaniola adrift, and let her go ashore where she fancied. But I had quite made up my mind that the mutineers, after the repulse of the morning, had nothing nearer in their hearts than to up anchor away to sea. This, I thought, would have been a fine thing to prevent, and now I had seen how they left their watchmen unprovided with a boat, it might have been done with little risk. Down I sat to wait for the darkness, and made a hearty meal of biscuit. It was night out of 10,000 for my purpose, and the fog was buried in heaven. As the last rays of daylight dwindled and disappeared, absolute darkness settled down on Treasure Island, and when at last I shouldered the coracle and groped my way stumblingly out of the hollow where I had supped. But there were 2 points visible on the anchorage. One was the great fire on the shore, by which the defeated pirates lay carousing in the swamp, and the other a mere blur of light upon the darkness, and indicated that the position of the anchored ship. She had swung around to the ebb, and her bow was now towards me. The only light on board was in the cabin, and what I saw was a mere reflection of the fog of the strong rays that flowed into the stern window. And the ebb had already run some time, and had begun to wade through the long belt of swampy sand, where I sank several times above an ankle, and I came to the edge of the retreating water, wading a little way in, with some strength and dexterity, set my coral, kneeled downwards on the surface.